There you see demonstrations in Iran overnight, taking on the regime after the downing of that Ukrainian jetliner with so many Iranians on board. Angry protests in the streets of Tehran. I want to talk about that now with the White House National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien. Mr. O'Brien, thank you for joining us this morning. We've seen the president send out messages of encouragement to those protesters, warnings to the Iranian regime not to mess with them. Is the regime in trouble right now?
I think the regime's having a very bad week. They shot down Ukrainian International Airlines 752, and the president's condolences and sympathy goes out to the passengers, their families, and their friends and loved ones. The Iranians then denied shooting the aircraft down, then gave a different story about the aircraft coming close to sensitive military installations, changed it again and said it was because of the United States. This is a regime that's reeling from maximum pressure. They're reeling from their incompetence in this situation. And the people of Iran are just fed up with it. Moreover, they lost their top female athlete, Kimi Zadeh, is just affected to the West. So this has not been a good week for the Iranian regime, that's for sure.
What more can and will the United States do to support those protesters? And does the United States basically now support a policy of regime change?
Well, look, it's never been our policy to change the regime in Iran, but the people of Iran are going to have, hopefully have the ability at some point to elect their own government and to be governed by the leaders they choose. I mean, we hope that around the world, but that's not our policy, and we're going to support human rights. The best thing we can do for the Iranian people and for the world is to continue our maximum pressure campaign to ensure that the Iranian regime never obtains a nuclear weapon, stops their terrorist activities in the region, and cuts back on their ballistic missile program. We're going to keep doing that. We're going to work with our allies, and I think we're going to see some additional assistance on that front coming out of Europe that has not been forthcoming in the past, but I think you're going to see the Europeans getting on board in the coming weeks as well.
We've got a new poll out this morning showing the majority of Americans are concerned about the administration's Iran policy, not convinced it's going to make the American people safer, the world safer as well. And we've just, of course, spoke with Nancy Pelosi and other members of Congress about the quality of the intelligence leading up to that strike on General Soleimani. What the president has said about 4 embassies being targeted seems to be at odds with what a lot of Democrats and others heard in those briefings. So does the administration have an obligation to come out with better intelligence, better explanation of what happened so they can convince the American people to get behind their policy?
Well, I think the American people are behind this president. He's shown incredible restraint in the face of provocation after provocation from Iran, downing of drones, attacking the Aramco's facilities in Saudi Arabia, even with this latest missile attack. So he's shown he's modest in his dealings with other countries. But when you threaten to kill or to maim Americans, that's something this president won't put up with. We had very good intelligence. I would love to release the intelligence in light of this is kind of a Washington story, I believe. I'd love to release the intelligence. The reason we don't, George, is because that same intelligence, those same streams and channels are what allow us to protect Americans going forward. So rather than have a short-term political win, release the intelligence and say, I told you so. We want to keep the American people safe going forward. So we're going to be circumspect, but everything the president has said is consistent with, and his interpretation is very consistent with the intelligence, which showed that Soleimani was plotting to kill Americans, soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, and our diplomats. And so we feel very good about it, and we feel good about the explanation that's been given to Congress.
But if General Soleimani was targeting 4 embassies, why weren't those embassies alerted? Why weren't they evacuated?
Well, listen, we're not going to cut and run every time somebody threatens us. And I think you saw what happened in Baghdad, which was very different than Tehran 1979, very different than Benghazi. When the Baghdad embassy was attacked, we moved a company of Marines in on Ospreys. We moved a platoon of Army infantry in. And we said, this is not going to, we're going to draw a line here. We're not going to have another Benghazi. We're not going to have another Tehran embassy takeover where our diplomats are taken hostage. And so the president was decisive. I can tell you with respect to other embassies in the region, we've taken very reasonable security precautions there, and it's something we monitor all the time. But look, these are dangerous places, and our diplomats and our military forces are out in the front lines of freedom and representing us well, and we do the very best we can to protect them.
You mentioned Baghdad. Of course, as you know, the Iraqi parliament has voted to have U.S. troops leave Iraq. President Trump has said he's okay with that, but Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says he won't even discuss it. So what is the U.S. policy regarding American troops in Iraq right now?
Well, I think we all agree, Secretary Pompeo, the president, the vice president, the whole national security team, we'd love to have American soldiers come back to the United States. The reason that U.S. soldiers were in Iraq was number one, to defend ourselves early on in the process, but later has been to defeat ISIS. When the president took over, ISIS had a caliphate the size of Great Britain stretching across Iraq and Syria. That caliphate, physical caliphate, has been defeated. That's why our folks were there. Look, we're looking to multilateralize the obligations there, bring our European allies in to take a bigger share of the burden in helping the Iraqi people defend themselves against ISIS and other threats. And look, in the long run, we'd like the Iraqi soldiers and their military to defend their country and allow our men and women to come home. So I think it's fully consistent. The Secretary's comments, the President's comments are consistent. Let's get the Iraqis stood up so that we can bring our folks home.
I want to ask you a question about Russian election interference. I showed Speaker Pelosi that Bloomberg article suggesting that U.S. officials are concerned that Russia is at it again, trying to hurt Joe Biden, interfere in our election in an even more brazen way than in 2016. You also heard the Speaker say that she believes that the President in some ways is complicit with this by repeating these conspiracy theories about Ukraine that are rooted in Russian propaganda. So has the President told Vladimir Putin to cut out this election interference in 2016? And will he continue to do that even if it appears the Russians are trying to hurt Joe Biden?
He's absolutely told Putin to make sure that doesn't happen. And the idea that the President of the United States would collude with the Russians, I mean, this is a partisan fantasy that's been the flames which have been fanned for 3 years now. There's zero truth to it. There are a bunch of countries that would like to interfere with our elections. There are the Chinese, the Iranians, the Russians, and trust me, most of them would like to see President Trump leave and have a more malleable leader come in after him, where they could go back to the status quo before the president came in. And so we're concerned about it. Look, I don't want Russians or Chinese or Iranians or any others interfering with the Trump campaign, with the Biden campaign, with any campaign. And I think the president feels absolutely the same way. And to suggest otherwise is unfair and frankly a bit dangerous. That's the sort of thing that I think the Russians try to foment, and others is divisions in America. We need to stand together and put that sort of language aside for sure.
Setting aside the use of the word collusion, if the president's repeating conspiracy theories that are consistent with Russian propaganda, isn't that helping the Russian effort?
I don't see that. We've been very clear on our position with respect to the Russians, and that's to stay out of our elections. We've been very clear with the Chinese, and we've been very clear with the Iranians. And look, I think all of our leaders in both parties should have that same approach. But trying to use these things for some sort of partisan advantage is really disappointing.
Mr. O'Brien, thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.